think most of you would know the responsible AI principles around fairness, reliability and safety, privacy, security, inclusiveness, transparency, and accountability. And sometimes they vary a bit in the way they're described. But so I think sustainability can fit into the transparency and accountability principles of responsible AI. Why? Transparency, because when producing and using AI, we should all know the necessary information about how it was produced. And awareness, because people who design and deploy, but also who use AI, should be aware of their actions and the decisions and the impact of the systems, of those AI systems. And when we talk about the impact, it's the impact on society and on individuals, but it's also on the environment. So I really think that sustainability fits into the responsible AI topic. So obviously, when you might have seen the title of my presentation is called Tackling the AI Sustainability Paradox. And that's because I think, and I'm not the only one, that you can Google it, an increasing number of people are talking about an AI paradox, and the fact that there's two sides to the relationship between AI and the environment. So there's that green arrow where, AI can help with environmental issues. So to monitor ecosystems, for example, providing real-time satellite data to locate things such as illegal logging, or it can help with monitoring water quality, better predicting the weather. There's plenty of use cases now that shows, well, that it can help with smart farming, helping farmers detect plant diseases, but also optimizing growing conditions. And, it can help with better managing energy consumption, and just improving energy consumptions in cities and homes. So I think there's an increasing amount of literature on this, on articles showing how AI could help with for the environment. And I think those topics are fascinating. There's an increasing number of jobs as well and companies in that field. And I think it would be a great topic for maybe a future webinar, who knows. But today what I want to talk about is the other side of the coin. So it's that red arrow that you can see on the screen, and it's more of the detrimental impact of AI as a technology on the environment, simply because we don't really talk about it. So what I want to do is talk about the footprint of the digital world on the environment, and more specifically, AI's footprint on the environment. And it's a topic that's starting to be discussed, but overall, it's largely a topic that most people are not necessarily aware of or conscious about. So I think it's important to talk about it. So what I'll do today is I want to give you the key aspects to keep in mind when we talk about the impact of AI on the environment. Now, as a full disclaimer, I am no expert on the topic. I actually discovered the topic and became a bit more acquainted with it and definitely more interested in it quite recently when I went to a conference in London on green IoT. And so what I want to do today is, in the same way as I got a wake-up moment after going to that conference, and I met a lot of people, realized that there's really tons of companies that are working on making technology greener, but also AI greener. So what I want to do is just raise awareness, just in the same way as those people did with me, and hopefully incentivize you to look a bit more into that topic if it's of any interest. So there will be a Q&A at the end of the session. I'll do my best to answer your questions. But if I can't, bear with me. I'll try to redirect you towards resources. But I'm hoping at the end we can have a conversation so that hopefully everyone can bring something back home from today's conversation and presentation, and maybe look at this more in details. So what I'll do is, as I said, I'll walk you through the key components of AI's footprint. But then also, because I don't want to fill your Monday evening with only depressing facts, we'll look at ways we can address AI's footprint to strive towards a more sustainable and green AI. Also shedding a bit of light on some initiatives launching around the world on green AI. All right. So to start with, just because I've mentioned the word footprint quite a few times already, and I'm hoping we can make this a bit interactive, I was wondering if, let's make sure that everyone understands what footprint means, and more specifically, a digital carbon footprint. So I was wondering if any of you would be able to define what a digital carbon footprint is in simple terms, doesn't have to be very technical. And if not, that's completely fine too. I'll wait for a few seconds. All right, so a digital carbon footprint refers to the environmental impact of digital technologies and online activities. So when we talk about the environmental impact of digital technologies, the environmental impact is defined as the human activity in terms of pollution, damage to ecosystems, the depletion of natural resources. And that impact includes the emission of greenhouse gases, so that's carbon dioxide and methane, and then the energy consumption associated with the production, with the use as well, and the data transmission of these digital devices. Excuse me. So that's what we refer to when we talk about a digital carbon footprint. So emission of greenhouse gases and the energy consumption associated with the production, data transmission of these digital devices. All right, so now that we know what a digital carbon footprint, which is referred to as carbon footprint here, now that we know what it is, the world has been incurring a digital carbon footprint since a long time, since the inception of the internet, really. But the demand and usage of digital services has been increasing particularly fast over the past few years. And actually, when you do a bit of research, there's a data that I found that shows that since 2010, the number of internet users worldwide has more than doubled, and the global internet traffic has expanded 20-fold. So there's many, many more users on the internet. And so as the demand for digital services increases, so is society's digital carbon footprint, obviously. And in fact, as you can see, on this diagram, the cloud now has a greater carbon footprint than the airline industry. So when we're thinking about the carbon footprint globally, we think about industries such as transport, like trade, but really one of the biggest contributors now to society's carbon footprint is the cloud. And AI is dramatically contributing to increasing the magnitude of that digital carbon footprint. So in a study that Bain did quite recently, they forecast that by 2030, due to the growth of AI, along with an increasing usage of the cloud and rising volumes of data in more traditional applications, IT carbon emissions could increase by at least 3 times. So they did that study in 2022. So they were looking at a span between 2023, so 7 years. In 7 years, IT carbon emissions could increase by 3 times. So that's massive increase, and we can see here a bit the size of the problem. And everyone talks about AI now. Everyone wants to use AI. So the trend is unlikely to reverse. And you might have seen quite recently in pretty much all the big newspapers, there's been quite a few articles reporting on the increasing emissions of AI around the globe by big tech companies. But so really, what's behind that dramatic increase in AI's energy use and carbon emissions? So one of the first trends that we've been seeing is the number of AI users. So since the launch of ChatGPT, but also, over the past few years, there's many new players in the kind of like AI ecosystem, and there's also many more users. So an explosion of users and applications. We also use AI for many different use cases. We kind of started, like like the most common use was text generation, but we now have image generation, video generation. It's used for many use cases. So more users, more applications. And Bain did a study again that showed that nowadays almost 90% of the large companies in the US are using generative AI in some shape or form. It's not 90% of them, that's many, many companies. Another trend is the models themselves are becoming increasingly more powerful. So the corporate users are tapping into an increasingly, large, sophisticated, and power-hungry models. So another stat that I found is the total number of parameters grew from 1.5 billion in ChatGPT 2 in 2019 when it was released to 1.7 trillion for ChatGPT 4 released in 2023. And I don't have the latest figures for the last version of ChatGPT, but you can see that massive increase from 1.5 billion to 1.7 trillion. Obviously, the more parameters, the more compute required. And so, when we look at that increase in compute, it's been doubling every 3 to 4 months since 2012. That completely defies the Moore's law. So Moore's law is the number of transistors would double every 2 years with a limited rise in cost, but we're talking about a doubling every 2 years, whereas now that's Moore's law that has been showing over the years in history, and now we're talking about doubling every 3 to 4 months. So massive increase in compute, which obviously leads to escalated computational costs and carbon emissions. That's another reason behind AI's skyrocketing carbon footprint. And then, as I kind of already referred to, the usages of AI are changing as well. So we're using them for much more energy-intensive activities. So video generation, for example, requires up to 300 times more power than image generation. So the combination of the number of AI users, including more companies, etc., more powerful models, and then different usages of AI can be considered as like the key drivers behind that carbon footprint dramatically increasing. Now, when we look at AI's carbon footprint, we need to be aware about 2 types of footprints. One is the embodied footprint, and the other one is the operational footprint. So if we start with the embodied footprint, that refers to the emissions generated during the production of the hardware used for training and running AI models. So you will all know that AI is, there's something tangible behind it. There's some chips, some chips that need to be produced where you then train and run the AI models. And so the chips production upstream ecological footprint includes everything that arises from the production and provision of inputs by suppliers. So on that diagram, they're called the foundries. So everything that's required for chip manufacturing. So that includes mining and processing of raw materials. So that includes silicon and rare earth materials, which do have quite a bit of a carbon footprint. Then when you produce the chips, you also need some chemicals, and it can be quite hazardous. So they're fluorinated chemicals that are required to produce the chips themselves. Then the whole manufacturing cycle also requires energy and fuel consumption. And then anything that you produce, all the different chips need to be, or the GPUs and CPUs and all the kind of components entering that manufacturing process need to be transported back and forth from the different plants. So that embodied carbon footprint includes many different aspects. They're all kind of like summarized in that image, which also comes from a Bain report. But then obviously the ecological impact of chips does not stop after manufacturing. when we'll talk about it a bit afterwards, but we also need to calculate the usage in the end product. So for example, in the data center, then there's also some carbon footprint created later on downstream. And then waste is also contributing to that footprint. So the end of life treatment and the other aspects of that downstream process also need to be taken into account, because once the hardware is no longer in use, its disposal, its recycling do contribute to the embodied carbon emissions. And actually, it's not something that many people talk about, but electronic waste is a thing. It's one of the fastest growing waste streams in the world, and it amounts to about 57 million tons generated each year. That was a weird stat that I found, but that equals to the weight of the Great Wall of China every year. So that's to give you an idea of how much electronic waste is produced yearly around the globe. So the other aspect that I mentioned, so we just talked about the embodied carbon footprint. There's also the operational carbon footprint, and that's when it stems from the training and running of those AI models. So now we have produced them, we have the chips, but then obviously we need to train those models and then to use those models and run them. So training large-scale AI models requires an extensive use of compute and GPUs and CPUs, which themselves are extremely energy intensive. Data centers where we train and run those models are essential, but they are also very consuming in terms of energy. And in terms of CO2 emissions, they are estimated to have an impact of 2.5 to 3.7% of the global CO2 emissions. That's what puts them before the aviation or shipping industry in terms of global emissions. Now, in terms of the emissions incurred in the training of an AI, a large language model, of a neural network model, they're related. The emissions are related to the training server. So, running the training server, which is running the data server. So I'll show you a little bit more afterwards. But so a data center produces heat, so it needs to be cooled down. And we need energy to do that. Then obviously to run those data centers, the energy grid on which the data center is matters a lot. If it's a data center somewhere in Iceland using renewable energy, its carbon footprint will be much lower than a data center based somewhere in France using fossil energy. So that's another aspect to keep in mind. Then obviously the length of the training procedure will have an impact on the carbon footprint. If we're talking about a general purpose model or a specific use model, that has a different impact. And then the hardware, the chips themselves, they're not all of the same performance. Some of them are much more performant than others. So that will have an impact as well on the carbon footprint at the stage of training and running the models. So to give you an idea, so on that graph on the screen here, if you've had time to look at it whilst I was talking, training ChatGPT-3 emitted as much CO2 emissions as the emissions produced by 27 Americans during an entire year. 27 Americans or 91 humans if we take the average around the world. That's a lot of people living for a year, and that's what it takes to train one model. Another comparison that I found is that on average to train a large language model, it roughly equals to train one LLM, it roughly equals to 125 round-trip flights between New York and Beijing. So you can do New York, Beijing 125 times, and you'll have trained one large language model. That's roughly equivalent to 300,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions. So training has a massive impact in terms of carbon footprint. Now, Beyond training, another aspect of the operational carbon footprint of AI is what happens at the inference stage. So inference being the process of using AI models to make predictions. And that also contributes massively to the operational carbon footprint of AI. Because AI models are developed in the cloud that serve millions of requests daily, the cumulative energy usage of inference can become significant. And with the number of AI users increasing, along with users leveraging AI frequently and for tasks that are quite energy consuming, as I was talking about at the beginning, inference is becoming one of the steps in the machine learning cycle with the biggest carbon footprint, because even though it can have individually like smaller costs than training the model, over time adding up, it has actually a huge impact. If you think about it, if you're using some translating software, you use it for a whole paper that you don't understand in a different language, and you're constantly using an AI model for it. Every single inference will not use that much energy and that much resources, but if you add it up, it will reach a significant level. So, for example, and that's also why we need to also make sure, when we use AI, ask ourselves the question whether it makes sense to use AI or not. A single request in ChatGPT can consume 100 times more energy than one Google search, according to some tech experts. So it is much more consuming, and obviously we don't feel it when we do it because it's just type it, enter, and that's it. But there is a lot of energy being consumed behind it. And so some studies estimate that about 30 to 65% of emissions from AI could be attributed to that stage, to that inference stage. And the more AI will be used, the more will this increase. When you look at stats published by some big tech companies, so for example, AWS, they assess that inference is estimated to make up to 80 to 90% of their total machine learning cloud computing demand. And Meta attributed approximately 1/3 of their internal end-to-end machine learning carbon footprint to model inference. Google attributed 60% of their machine learning energy use to inference, compared to 40% for training. So that shows as well, it is very, very consuming. And so here on the screen, what I put is just to show you a bit of difference between the different tasks for which we use AI. They do have a very different impact in terms of carbon emissions. So, you look at text classification, which is a pretty simple task, but still useful. Compared to image generation, there is a massive difference. So we've now talked about the carbon footprint, talking about the embodied and the operational carbon footprint. Another aspect that is a bit disregarded is water, the usage of water for AI. So when we talk about carbon footprint, many companies are now including in those AI model cards where you have all the information about the models, they do include the carbon footprint. One thing that is completely disregarded and not included in those cards is the water footprint of AI. So the water footprint refers to the total volume of fresh water consumed both directly and indirectly throughout the life cycle of a product or process or system. So here in an AI model. So in the context of AI, it includes the embodied water. So it's the same thing. There's an embodied and operational. So the embodied water footprint accounts for water used in the manufacturing of hardware components. So again, the chips production require a lot of water. And then the operational water footprint is the water used in the maintenance and in the operational the operations of those data centers for training and running the AI models. So I talked about the cooling. So as you can see here on the screen, as I was talking about the data centers overheating in some way, they need to be cooled down. That's a lot of water being used. So in that operational water footprint, we talk about on-site water consumption. So that's the cooling towers, what I was talking about, to kind of dissipate the heat into the outside environment and avoiding the service to overheat. So water is used in those cooling towers, and that's usually, it's clean, fresh water being used for that. And the second aspect in that operational water footprint is the offsite water consumption, and that's just from generating the electricity to power those data centers. So, if you look at how a nuclear plant works, it also overheats, and you also need to cool it down. So there's a lot of water used in those facilities to just produce the electricity. So in 2022, the combined global fresh water taken from the ground or surface water sources that was used by Google, Microsoft, and Meta to cool down their data centers, as well as to run those data centers, reached an estimated of 2.2 billion cubic meters. That's the equivalent of the total annual water withdrawal of 2 Denmarks. So in a year, they've been using as much water as two Denmarks. So that's quite a lot of water. Another stat that I found online is from some academics, is that they suggested that AI demand in the next few years would drive up water withdrawal to between 4.2 billion and 6.6 billion cubic meters by 2027. That's equal to half of the amount of water consumed by the UK each year. So again, we're talking about consumptions of entire countries here. So it's something that no one talks about, but has a massive impact. Another thing to keep in mind, maybe I've been keeping that in mind when I use ChatGPT, when we look at AI's operational water footprint, inference again has a massive impact, because GPT needs to drink a 500 milliliters bottle of water for roughly 10 to 50 responses, depending on when and where it's deployed. And the more powerful the model, the more water it needs to drink as well. Now, AI water footprint varies depending on where it's trained and hosted. I gave the example of those data centers in Iceland, or in some cool places in the world. Those will be more efficient than some based in warmer countries. But so, given the significant energy demands of AI models and the fact that AI is increasingly used, the associated water use for cooling and electricity generation is substantial, and we need to pay attention to it, especially, like some data centers are being built in some water-stressed regions. So something definitely to keep in mind and to be conscious about. So I am done with all my bad news about AI's impact. So now let's turn on to what can we do to make AI greener. So change is required from everyone to make AI greener, including those who create and those who use AI. Zero and low carbon approaches to AI do not have to, compromise on the performance of AI models. There are ways to optimize the way we build and use AI as well. Researchers from Google and the University of California in Berkeley have shown that the carbon footprint of large language models can be reduced by 100 to 1,000 times when using the appropriate algorithms and when using the appropriate hardware and also when optimizing the energy resources for data centers. So if we look first at what companies and developers can do to, kind of shift towards a more greener AI, it's something that companies have to do, because it's no longer just an ethical consideration. It's becoming a business imperative. It's also becoming a massive differentiator compared to competitors. And so several factors are driving this integration of AI and sustainability. So I just mentioned the competition, but there's also some regulation coming into place in the EU and elsewhere in the world. Consumer expectations, investors as well, investing in companies that are greener, and just in general operational efficiency. It's probably an upfront investment into changing the ways things are being done, but then there are operational efficiency gains to have in the future. So what can be done? So first of all, integrating sustainability as a core principle from the outset of AI development. So shifting the mindset and keeping sustainability in mind. So one way to do that is to create and use sustainability impact assessments to evaluate the environmental impact of AI models during their development. And, as a company, deciding on when and where to train the large language models can have a massive impact on the carbon and water footprint. Another tool is conducting comprehensive life cycle analysis of AI systems to assess the energy consumption of carbon emissions and of those AI software, by identifying and addressing the sustainability challenges at every stage of the development. And when I went to that conference a couple of months ago, there were many companies that sell this as a service. So there's software, like off-the-shelf software that help you estimate the carbon footprint of AI training models during the development process, or to measure the post-deployment energy consumption, or to analyze and reduce your carbon footprint. So I have tons of names of those companies. If you're interested in them, I can share them afterwards. But they're the likes of Carbon Tracker, Code Carbon, MLPerf, Kepler, Green Pixie, Website Carbon. There's tons of them, really. So I can share them with you. Another thing that I already talked about is, using energy efficient algorithms and optimizing the AI infrastructure. So we can think of streamlining AI models to reduce the computational requirements without again compromising on the performance. And there are existing techniques that developers in companies can use. So there are things such as pruning. I'm not a technical person, so I'm not going to go into the details, but it's basically the practice of removing parameters from an existing network to make it kind of lighter. Something called quantization as well, the process of converting floating point parameters in a neural network to a lower precision format. So that reduces the memory storage and the computational requirements, and therefore the carbon, the overall footprint. So there are ways to make more energy efficient algorithms. It's just something that it's a change of mindset, and we need to keep it in mind. Companies can also invest in green data centers powered by renewable energies. So maybe instead of having a data center, I don't know, somewhere in Texas, maybe it would make more sense to have it somewhere in Alaska, something like that. But also, for companies to make sure that they analyze or actually ask for information on the resource usage across the supply chain, across all their vendors. There are now some initiatives and some companies that are being pushed to decarbonize the cloud. So knowing the footprint of all the vendors in the cloud. So that's another thing that companies can push for. And then, use AI in a more intelligent way. So companies can leverage prompt engineering, such as selecting predefined prompts for users, or using caching of existing responses. Those are small things to change, and they do help. fine-tuning models instead of recreating, new ones, but also, training their workforce and upskilling them on precisely learning about those that way of creating eco or sustainable algorithms, and also raising awareness about a topic. And then the last thing, obviously, is also we don't need AI for everything. It is kind of sometimes the easy option, but companies can also think about whether for some business use cases, whether AI is actually the technology that is required, or whether something else can work as well. They can also advocate for green AI. So I'll talk about governance afterwards, but companies have a massive power in terms of advocating for things. So they could, foster collaboration within the industry. And when I say they could, we can also, as well as employees in our respective companies, we can advocate for more collaboration around sustainable AI within our industries. We can support some open source initiatives, and also we can push for companies to set industry standards, push for policy development, cross-sector partnership between public and private sectors, and just leading by example, really. So that's one thing that companies can do and that we can do as well. I talked about governments. So in terms of what governments can do, what they are the actors to set the best practices and to impose metrics, to create metrics, to report on carbon emissions across supply chains. They can also push you in the same way as companies to develop industry standards, frameworks, and guidelines in the whole procurement for AI technologies, legislations on making things more transparent. So, I talked about responsible AI principles. Well, as part of the transparency principle, making sure that we as users know the kind of like what went behind the production of those AI powered products. And then also fostering private sector led energy infrastructure investments. So, giving grants, pushing for that, tax incentives for cloud providers to open data centers powered by renewable energies, because we saw that has a big impact. Investing in collaborations between universities, the private sector, anything that could advance research on this topic, because it is a very nascent topic and there is still a lot to look at and to research about. And just in general, promoting tech-aware climate policy, maybe making it a big topic at one of the COP20, COP30 now, I guess. So that's also something that governments can do. And last but not least for us, there are things that we can do as well as users, and some of you will be developers, so some of the things that I've already mentioned for companies apply to you as well. But so for us, if we're developers or users, we can, we can use existing large language models. There's tons of models now available on the internet, and it's more, it has the footprint is lessened if we use existing models and fine tune them instead of generating our own every time we have a new use case. That's one thing to keep in mind. Is there anything that we can use already that exists? If we're going to generate our own model using energy conserving computational methods, so I've talked about pruning and quantization already. So learning about those techniques and implementing them. In the same way as companies, do we need to use AI every time? Is there another kind of tool or technology that we can use instead of using generative AI? Can you maybe do a Google search instead of asking ChatGPT for something that you're looking for? We can also ask for more transparency on the energy sources of our cloud providers or the data centers that we use, the virtual machines that we use. So asking for, where and how, was the AI developed? Where is the data stored? Is the data stored in green data centers? Nowadays, it's very hard to find that information. But maybe advocating to as a consumer to have more of that information. And then lastly, learning and contributing to the knowledge on green AI methodologies. So again, I am no developer, I am no technical person, and I'm definitely not an expert on anything that I've talked about, but that's my way of contributing, just talking about it and raising awareness. And that's something that's accessible to everyone, really. So that's it in terms of what we can do. And I just wanted to do a last thing. I wanted to raise to shed a bit of like a spotlight on some initiatives. So when you look for green AI initiatives on the internet, there's not much, to be honest. It's quite depressing. But I did find some. So Fujitsu and Supermicro, which are two companies in APAC in Asia, are working on developing green AI computing technologies. So there's an article in the Financial Times that's quite interesting. India has been described as one of the countries that is making the more advancements in terms of green AI, simply because they're making AI part of like their inherent part of their policies, and something that the Indian government has been taking very seriously. But they're also aware of climate change and repercussions, resources constraints within their country. So they are really trying to take the lead on that green AI movement. But again, not much information available, but it's quite promising to see India working on that. Singapore is also pioneering that green AI movement. They have that massive project to create a sustainable green city in Singapore, and optimizing resources, leveraging AI. So a bit of some articles on it as well, and then it's quite interesting to see and then to read. And then on the left hand side of your screen, I put two organizations that I've interacted with, mostly through, I got to know them through the conference that I talked about, and the conference was organized by Green.io. And so they champion green technologies in general and green IoT. But they have a podcast, which is amazing. They keep inviting experts on, like tech experts talking about sustainability, but also they're really like building that bridge between sustainability and technology. And many of their podcasts are on AI, so I highly recommend it. And they run a conference every year. I think it's London, Paris, and New York. But they have a website. I highly encourage you to go visit it and to listen to the podcast as well. And the other organization is climateaction.tech, and they raise awareness about the nexus between climate action and technology. They do courses, they do mentoring as well, but they do a lot of education on that on the green technology topic. So, and they have a Slack as well, which is really nice to connect with the community, hear about events, and just learn about this topic. So that's it for me. I hope I didn't overload you with information. I'm happy to share the screens afterward. The screens. I'm happy to share the slides with you afterwards. But yeah, let's open the floor to questions or just a conversation. I'd be curious to hear about your experience with green AI, sustainability, anything really. Let's make this a conversation. Or not. We can also go and have dinner as well.
Any questions, guys? Feel free. All right. So Mabel is asking a question. Do you have any workplace initiatives around AI integration, deployment, etc.?
So I'm not sure what ETC stands for.
Etc.
Oh, I thought it was like a technology.
No, it's me.
I'm still in my technology mind, but
No.
So in terms of initiatives going like green AI initiatives, I can talk about Swift because I know we're starting to look at this as part of responsible AI. We are, I mean, the ESG team is not I'm part of the strategy team, so not exactly the same team, but the ESG team at Swift is about to run I think it's a full training pack, like a full training portfolio, at least a few sessions on green AI and how to use AI more responsibly. And part of it is using more sustainable techniques for AI. But that's all I know about Swift, and I can't really tell about any other companies. I think from the articles that I found, the consulting companies, Bain and BCG, are quite active on that topic. Now, I don't know whether it means that themselves they run specific initiatives within their companies, but that's something maybe that other people can answer in the call.
Thank you so much, Alicia. Any other questions from anyone else? Wow, response is great, Alicia. Everyone loved it. Everyone is very grateful for your really interesting and interactive and scary at the same time presentation.
I know. I hope I didn't scare everyone off, but
no, I mean it's good. It's good to be aware, like you said, right? And you gave us some really great sort of indications of what we can do, from organizations, to departments, to us as users, and just as normal citizens. So that's really good to know. It makes it quite relatable, and we sort of can have our own action plan on how to help and ensure that it's all under control. So there is another question from Gioti, and my apologies if I'm mispronouncing the name. So in your research, did you find any of the big companies taking any steps towards reducing their carbon footprint in training big models?
Yes, I did find some, but funnily enough, I mean, it's not funny at all, but whenever there's an article on like a big tech company, so I'm talking about Google, Meta, like Amazon, doing an initiative to greenify, their AI training processes, there's always a second article kind of showing that it's more like greenwashing than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they are increasingly understanding that it is a requirement. And as I said, it's no longer just an ethical consideration to have. It's something that's going to become the norm, hopefully, at some point. But in terms of concrete things, there are articles about them working towards that. Now, the exact impact is to be confirmed. But you also have an increasingly number of organizations that are holding those companies accountable for what they publish on this. And if you go on the climateaction.tech and on Green.io, I think as well, they refer to some of those organizations that are publishing reports and kind of making sure that the data, I mean, the information published by those companies is to kind of look at the way it was built as well. So I think there are initiatives, their actual impact to be confirmed.
Yeah, I like Rania's reflection. So I think, Alicia, you did some impact for sure when it comes to raising awareness. So Rania is questioning how come no one ever tells us about this,
Yeah.
all the water footprint information that you told us, because we do indeed use ChatGPT quite a bit. We ask all the live questions to ChatGPT, right? And no one ever tells us these things, right? We just
exactly, and that's why I think raising awareness is both the easiest thing and also one of the most important things, because if you don't know, you won't ask the question. And so, in many industries now, the aviation industry, but also the clothing industry, you have more information about that, but that's because the consumers have been asking for it. So if we don't ask about that information, about that transparency, it will never happen. So I think awareness is important, and then keep asking the questions.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely gonna reconsider, I think, my ChatGPT consumption from today for sure.
we need to continue using it. It's an amazing technology. I love it, but being conscious about its impact and pushing for greener AI.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think it's very correct in terms of what you said, right? It needs to be used almost like, for right purposes, right? If it can be avoided, then potentially we should think about it, right? And in some cases, it indeed is great tool to be used. So I think that sort of pragmatism and level of proportionality is quite important, like with anything really in life, right? With any sort of emerging technology, right? Or anything in life, when it's too much of something, it's doesn't tend to be good.
yeah, exactly. And beyond AI, again, I keep referring to these two organizations, but they look at the footprint of technology in general, and they have really interesting articles and podcasts on everything digital and the impact it has. So I learned during the conference that depending on how you build your website, the colors that you put on your website, that has a different energy consumption depending on the colors on like the way you lay out your website. So if you want to look into it, there's tons of things to learn about, not just about AI, but digital technologies in general.
No, absolutely. Right. Excellent. Any other last minute questions? I don't see anything coming in, and I'm also conscious of time. So I think on that note, we're going to wrap up. So Alicia, thank you so much. I know how much you're passionate about AI, and this is not the first event we did together on the subject. So we before spoke about all sorts of stuff, including gender balance and AI. So now we speak about sustainability. I'm sure Alicia's research will continue, and we will have another great tech talk on more on more aspects of AI. So thank you so much. And as you can see, you did a great impact. And yes, thank you so much for coming and participating. If you have a moment to fill in our a feedback form, that would be really appreciated, because that helps us to improve and ensure that you can enjoy these tech talks to the fullest. So if you have a moment, please fill it in. And yes, stay tuned, obviously, with all of our events, all of our activities through Slack or through our LinkedIn. I hope you find it useful. And then when it comes to this tech talk, it has been recorded and it will be updated to our YouTube channel, which we started running a couple months ago. So if you want to spread the word about the impacts of AI and sustainability, you can always share it with your friends, with your colleagues once it's posted there. So it should be a couple of days or so. So stay tuned, and you can find us Women Coding Community on YouTube channel as well. So thank you once again, everyone, and thank you, Alicia. And I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you all. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. Bye.